When it comes to vapes, we're living through a period of change, where the government's trying to stop the tide of colourful, flavourful, disposable vapes flowing into the country.
Last episode, we heard that the road to regulation isn't always easy.
So that's what I want. That's the outcomes I want. I'll just keep fighting for that.
We always prepare for a fight.
But there's a potential roadblock still ahead.
The tobacco industry has always fought very hard against these sorts of regulations.
In this episode, we're going to look a bit deeper at those who want vapes legalised.
They can smell out a loophole and they push it open and make it into a door that they can waltz right through.
I mean, if anybody's addicted to nicotine, it's your federal government.
The government's crackdown on vapes is underway, but so is a campaign to legalise vaping. At first glance, it's not obvious where these ads are coming from. But if you go back and look at the Responsible Vaping Australia Facebook page, it says this page was created and run by BAT Australia, British American Tobacco. British American Tobacco, or BAT, is one of the biggest cigarette manufacturers and sellers in the world. So why are they interested in vapes, which arguably are cigarettes' competition? I reached out to British American Tobacco to ask them this, but they turned down my offer of an interview. They did send through a statement though, saying that through Responsible Vaping Australia, BAT consistently advocates for nicotine vapes to be regulated, and that regulations of this nature would allow the Australian government to control the market and reduce the demand for dangerous, illegal products, and prevent them falling into the hands of children and teens.
Sometimes people can be quite confused as to why on earth does Philip Morris or British American Tobacco care about vaping laws? But again, we've got to step back a little bit because this is a very complicated web these companies leave. In Australia, you have the major players in the tobacco industry. You've got British American Tobacco and you've got Philip Morris International, pretty much the two main players in this space.
British American Tobacco makes cigarettes like Dunhill and Lucky Strike. Philip Morris makes Marlboro.
In other words, these are companies which traditionally have made their money selling cigarettes, way before vapes were even a thing. But in recent years, they've been advocating for the legalisation of vapes.
Philip Morris International and BAT both manufacture disposable, flavoured, highly addictive vapes, and they sell them legally in other countries that don't have the same regulatory regime as us. If you're Philip Morris or British American Tobacco, you can't just have your products sold on the illicit market. They want to be able to legally sell those same products here. And they can't do that unless nicotine vapes are legal as a consumer recreational good. They wanted to see Australians' vaping laws completely weakened. That's what they've been lobbying for.
Okay, Zara, we're doing this vape series, and something that keeps coming up is the role of lobbying and lobbyists in Canberra. And I wanted to come to you to find out a bit more about this because you have a personal relationship with lobbying.
Sounds like I'm married to lobbying, but I'm not. In my previous life, I worked as a lobbyist. And essentially, it can mean many things. But if I put it down to one thing, it is access and power. As a lobbyist, you are hired by a private company. They hire you to help them get access to decision makers, so politicians. And through that, they get more power.
So in this context, we are going to see legislation introduced this year to do with vaping regulations. So in the context of lobbyists, what might be happening at the moment in Parliament House?
The role of lobbyists would be to map out who are the important people in this story. So it's not just the government who's introducing that legislation, it's also who they can expect to agitate against the legislation.
When you are taking meetings with Big Tobacco, what does that conversation look like?
Well, I want to know how the market works, right? And this is the other thing I find very strange, I only really discovered this week. The government doesn't meet with big tobacco companies, which I find very strange because they take $12 billion of revenue from big tobacco.
Senator Canavan is referring to the federal government's tax on cigarettes.
I mean, if anybody's addicted to nicotine, it's your federal government.
Australia has signed a World Health Organization treaty, which sets out some limits on the way officials interact with the tobacco industry. This is to try prevent the industry from influencing policy and reform.
Governments here are very hypocritical. They told me that I shouldn't even talk to big tobacco companies, yet they're taking $12 billion a year in excise from selling tobacco.
Senator Canavan says he's fighting against vape reform because it's the right thing to do.
I had a few friends who vaped. And they contacted me and said, this will be terrible, like, what are we going to do? And I had a look at it and I thought, this is really bad. This is why are we doing this? So I started fighting against it. That's why I did that. And people, I'm happy for anybody to question my motives or question why or how I'm doing it. They can do what they like. But I'd much prefer if we just had a debate about what's right and wrong.
Do you feel like yourself and other members of the Nationals can fairly represent your constituents when your party is accepting money from big tobacco companies like Philip Morris?
Yeah, absolutely I do.
In the 2021 to 2022 financial year, the Federal Nationals Party accepted $55,000 from Philip Morris.
Because two can play this game. I mean, the Labor Party takes a lot of money from trade unions. And it just happens that right now they're introducing legislation which will help trade unions.
But the trade unions aren't necessarily responsible for 20,000 people in Australia dying every year from cigarettes.
Hang on, I would argue that actually it's the choices of people alone. It's a legal product. If we want to get rid of tobacco, we could ban it. I think there has to be some question of why the government is pushing people towards a worse health outcome in smoking that they just happen to raise $12 billion from, instead of being able to use vapes, which currently they have no taxes on.
Why not crack down on cigarettes the same way you're cracking down on vapes?
Well, we are cracking down. We've increased the price.
But they're still going to be able to be bought at every supermarket in the country.
Yeah, we've increased the price. We're cracking down on those marketing arrangements.
The federal government passed new tobacco reforms through Parliament at the end of last year, which will change the warnings on cigarettes and introduce new restrictions on more traditional tobacco products. The government got their tobacco reform through the Parliament, and they're likely going to get their vape reforms through too.
Isn't big tobacco fighting a losing battle? The government said they're going to be legislating strongly on cracking down on vapes. Why do they still push back on reform?
Look, I don't want to simplify it too much, but at the end of the day, isn't it just about cash? It's about money. If you're big tobacco, you don't just sort of roll over and die. You go, okay, we've got a country like Australia, which is a world leader in tobacco control, and now also a world leader in vaping control. When we adopted plain packaging in Australia, for example, almost over a decade ago now, that has spread to dozens of countries around the world. So they need to come in and squash really progressive legislation because it has a knack for catching on.
How much of a role has big tobacco played in slowing the regulation of vapes up until now? And are you ready to fight that fight moving forward?
Absolutely. I was in the last government as a health minister, last Labor government more than 10 years ago, when we were the first country in the world to introduce plain packaging of cigarette packets, and those graphic warnings you now see on the front of cigarette packets. They're now seen in dozens and dozens of countries around the world. But when we did that, the tobacco industry threw every lawyer they could find at us. They took us to court internationally. We fought for years defending that program. So I know through experience that when you put in place these regulations that are designed to stamp out essentially a strategy of big tobacco, they'll fight us because they've got a lot of profit to make out of the status quo.
We'll have to wait and see how big tobacco chooses to respond to the government's vape reforms.
There's a lot of money to be made in a highly addictive product people could go on to use for decades.
The one thing everyone seems to agree on is that there could be a fight still ahead.
We always prepare for a fight. The tobacco industry has always fought very hard against these sorts of regulations.
As always, the Daily Aus is going to be here to explain what's happening as it happens.